Hey, it's your guy Tyrrell back with the interviews. Manchester City moved to the top of the Premier League, crushing Chelsea at the Etihad Stadium. How did they do it? Where did Chelsea go wrong? Don't worry, here at the interviews, we've got you covered. So on this edition of the interviews, we're going to break down how Manchester City convincingly defeated Chelsea. So before we get into today's video, don't forget to give our video a thumbs up if you do enjoy it. The bell below does give you daily notifications regarding our organic, unfiltered soccer/footy analysis. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel. In today's video, we're basically going to break down the first half and see why Chelsea went into halftime trailing 4-0, what they did wrong, and what Manchester City did right. But first, let's get to the starting lineups. We look at Manchester City, more of a 4-3-3. Raheem Sterling, Sergio Aguero, and Bernardo Silva up front. In midfield, they went with Fernandinho, Gundogan, and Kevin De Bruyne. Then we look to Chelsea. No real surprises here with how they lined up. 4-3-3 as well. Hazard, Pedro, and Higuain up front. In midfield, they went with Jorginho, Conte, and Ross Barkley. So now let's look to the first half. See how Manchester City convincingly built a 4-goal lead over Chelsea and why the Blues couldn't cope. So Manchester City made easy work of Chelsea, and a lot of it stems from the way that they approached the game in contrast to how Chelsea did with and without the ball. When we look at City in the opening stages, the way that they did press did make sense. They had Aguero obviously stepping to one of the center backs, but more importantly, they had a ploy to shut down Jorginho, which is what we've seen from bigger teams this season. When they've looked to press Chelsea, they've looked to find a way to ensure that Jorginho was unable to get ample time on the ball to really dictate play from deeper positions. What we ended up seeing with City was that if Aguero pushed out to the right and did step to Rudiger, we would have Kevin De Bruyne step to David Luiz, and we'd have Gundogan sit on Jorginho and vice versa. If Aguero was pushing out to David Luiz and Gundogan ended up stepping to Rudiger, we'd have Kevin De Bruyne follow Jorginho. And from there, what we would see is the wider players stick out and push out to the fullbacks in Bernardo Silva and Raheem Sterling when the ball was pushed out into the fullbacks in Azpilicueta or Marcos Alonso, and that was how they were able to really ensure that Chelsea were unable to really build from the back until they kind of went ahead. So Chelsea really did struggle to create chances from open play. When they did have possession, City dropped off into more of a narrow 4-5-1. They compressed space between the lines, but a lot of that did happen after they did go up 4-0. But Chelsea did have some bright moments. A lot of it stemmed from direct play. We saw David Luiz involved in most of it, and we saw Jorginho involved. We looked to one of the opening chances where we do, not really an opening chance, but we saw an opening where David Luiz was able to play the ball in between Gundogan and in between Fernandinho for Eden Hazard, dropping off into that narrow space, and Hazard was able to pick up the ball, run past Fernandinho, then skip past both center backs and skip past Kyle Walker, but he was fired a tame effort on goal. But that was one opportunity where you could see Chelsea kind of building something. Later on in the half, after they did fall behind, you had Jorginho again split that same duo in Fernandinho and Gundogan to find Higuain with the ball, and he was able to hold off the two center backs and backheel it into the path of Pedro, and Pedro fired the same shot at Ederson. Should do better, doesn't do better. One of their final opportunities, again, it saw Pedro trying to make that run off Zinchenko, and Luiz was able to find him, which forced Laporte out, and he nodded the ball into the path of Higuain, who chested it down and volleyed his effort on goal, but Ederson pushed it away. Luiz earlier on did clip a ball into the path, try to get it over the top for Higuain, and Stones knotted it up, and that eventually led to Hazard battling off Fernandinho and playing it into Barkley, who cut on Bernardo Silva, but he fired a shot wide. So you could kind of see how Chelsea were going about things. They were trying to play it long because they couldn't really bypass that press in the initial phase that City were stepping to them. So that was one big issue for them. But for Chelsea, it was the same issues here. You knew what they were all about. Pedro trying to run in behind. No real great service for Higuain. Hazard was lively whenever he got the ball, forcing opposition into fouls, but it wasn't enough, and the Chelsea midfield just never really got going. But when you look to how City were going about things, they were able to get into Chelsea's half because Chelsea's pressing didn't really make sense given the fact that they were pressing in twos. Hazard wasn't really stepping to Kyle Walker, and Kyle Walker had lots of time on the ball. You had Zinchenko constantly bypassing Pedro and causing overloads down the left-hand side with Raheem Sterling for Azpilicueta. We often saw the fullbacks tuck in a bit narrow because Bernardo Silva was holding the width, Raheem Sterling was holding the width. That does create space in midfield for Gundogan and Kevin De Bruyne to get on the ball. But the most important thing here was when you saw Higuain stepping to Laporte, you would eventually hope that Ross Barkley was stepping there into the path of John Stones to prevent him from getting on the ball and vice versa. If Higuain moved to Stones, then you would have Conte step to Laporte, and that's how they were going about things. The problem here was that Fernandinho was slotting into that space there, and most teams often send a third midfielder to ensure that someone could sit on Fernandinho to ensure that he's unable to get onto the ball. Just like Jorginho wasn't, that you don't want Fernandinho to be on the ball. He is the catalyst into how they build attacks from deeper positions, but Chelsea weren't going about their business in that sense. So if that's happening and you're not getting anyone on Fernandinho, that does allow him to get on the ball. And the problem here was, for instance, let's say Conte did step to Laporte and Barkley then stepped forward to Fernandinho. What that would leave was Jorginho in midfield alone, and you would have Gundogan and you would have Kevin De Bruyne sliding into those spaces there. And that was the big issue that Manchester City had, was that he was often isolated in those positions. And when they tried to press Fernandinho, he didn't know where to go from there. And that was a big problem for them. We saw in some cases where the ball would shift out to Laporte, and you know that Gundogan would be looking to get onto the ball. Conte would sit in front of him, but the problem there is that with Conte sitting in front of Gundogan, you would often have Sergio Aguero drop into that space to get on the ball. And that was one of the bigger problems there, is that when Gundogan dropped deeper, if he wanted to get in search of the ball and Conte would step to him, you would have Aguero drop off into that space. And if Aguero drops off into that space, then that adds another midfielder. And that was an issue that Chelsea were dealing with. When you look to the build-up to the free kick that leads to their opener, you see the problem that Chelsea have as well. What happens there is that you have Hazard sitting on Kyle Walker, you have Barkley pushing forward to Stones, and with him sitting on Stones, you have Fernandinho, and you have Conte and Jorginho sitting to Fernandinho. The problem here is that Stones switches the ball out to Bernardo Silva, and when he switches the ball out to Bernardo Silva, Alonso steps to him, but Bernardo Silva finds Kevin De Bruyne right there. Kevin De Bruyne now is goal side, is to the either side of Jorginho, and you have Gundogan there as well, as you had Conte stepping, and what happens now is that Kevin De Bruyne is able to drive forward before Jorginho does clip him down. When you look at the free kick adds more issues to Chelsea's concern, because you have Bernardo Silva sitting with Marcos Alonso. You have Eden Hazard dropping off as well. With Hazard dropping off, you think, okay, you're fine there. There's no real issue. You have Aguero sitting. You have Gundogan pushing forward as well. And then you have Raheem Sterling out wide. So what happens here is that you have Azpilicueta watching him. You have Conte and you have Rudiger near Gundogan. You have those two again with Aguero. So why does Alonso shift over? Because once Alonso shifts over, Kevin De Bruyne is able to play that pass in between the space of Hazard for Bernardo Silva, who's able to break forward, and his cross leads to Raheem Sterling, and that was how they were able to get the go-ahead goal. We also saw the fact that City weren't really switching over from what they did against Arsenal. We saw later on in that half, the ball shifts out to Raheem Sterling, who's able to get past Azpilicueta and play the ball in behind Rudiger for Kevin De Bruyne, making the run in behind him. De Bruyne drags out David Luiz, and that leads to a ball being played to Bernardo Silva, breaking into the box, who ends up running around the opposite way. Marcos Alonso falls asleep, and he plays the ball into the path of Sergio Aguero, but Sergio Aguero misses his shot, and that goes inches wide from point-blank range. But you see De Bruyne making that run in behind, and we saw that against Arsenal in the previous week, where he's making those darts in behind the fullbacks. And there was one play in particular where we saw Laporte clip the ball out to Bernardo Silva, and what happens there is Alonso steps to him, but because Chelsea are pressing from the front and you had Barkley stepping forward, what happens there is that De Bruyne's able to make that run in behind, but Bernardo Silva was unable to complete the pass with him. So we look to more City chances, and a lot of them stem from the fact fact that the center backs were able to push forward, and Chelsea's pressing from the front was not sustainable in the first half. We look to one of the opportunities where we have Stones was able to play the ball in between Higuain and in between Barkley for Fernandinho. Fernandinho now has time because two players are sucked out of the game to play a pass into Aguero, who drags out Azpilicueta. And when he drags out Azpilicueta, he's able to shift the ball out wide to Zinchenko, who's making the overlapping run. Zinchenko's able to push past Azpilicueta, and he's able to bypass Jorginho, but the loose ball falls to Aguero, and Aguero's able to hold off Jorginho, gain a yard on Rudiger, and curl his effort into the top corner. But again, just two players in Barkley and Higuain getting sucked out of the game, and now Chelsea are outnumbered, and that is how City were able to get about them, because then when we get forward to the fourth goal, the third goal stemmed from a poor Barkley back header from a hopeful Zinchenko cross, fell to Aguero, is able to put into the net. But this goal again just goes to show what Chelsea were trying to do and why they were encountering issues. And this time it's Laporte, after already bypassing a pass in between Conte and Pedro. He does it again after Aguero dropped the ball off to Laporte. He plays it back to Aguero, who picks up the ball in that space, and he slides the ball out wide to Raheem Sterling. And Raheem Sterling now is able to go 1v1 with Azpilicueta, and he plays the ball into Aguero in the box. This time you see Rudiger and you see David Luiz step to the occasion, but the problem is that it falls to Gundogan, who isn't closed down, and he curls an effort past Kepa, a shot that Kepa should save. But with that being said, 25 minutes into the half, City are up 4-0. Chelsea did have their chances that I did mention within that span as well, but when you break it all down, there was a big problem here, where City had a direct way to stop Chelsea and ensure that they could, well, limit their chances that they did create and force Luiz and Jorginho to an extent play longer balls into their attackers. They limited the fact that Hazard had to go 1v1. They limited service into Higuain, whereas for Chelsea, they didn't have any issues. They didn't have any way to stop Chelsea or Manchester City from building out of the back, and that was the big problem there, was because when the center backs and when the center forward in Higuain and the shuttlers pushed forward, City had 3v2, and when they tried to step to Fernandinho, then you had a big issue because Jorginho was now pulled out of position, and you had Gundogan and you had Kevin De Bruyne looking to pick up the ball in that space. You had Kevin De Bruyne looking to run in behind the fullbacks, and even if you had Conte trying to sit off and ensure that there was no balls played into Gundogan dropping deeper, Aguero was doing a great job of pulling Rudiger out of position and dropping into midfield to ensure that Jorginho still had ample space to cover with two men on either side of him that could pick up the ball. And that's just great work from Pep Guardiola. And one of the issues that, besides Chelsea making mistakes, they were gonna encounter issues here, because Guardiola had a game plan and they were executing it to a T, and Jorginho was struggling to cover space because Conte, Barkley, Hazard, and Pedro weren't pressing hard enough and closing down spaces in a timely manner. But let me know what you guys think. Will Manchester City now go on after beating Arsenal, Everton, and Chelsea to win the Premier League title? And what about Chelsea? Another big loss away from home. Do they have what it takes to finish in the top 4? Meet me in the comments below. Don't forget I upload videos every day, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. And that was your daily dose of the interviews.